Good evening, everyone. Welcome to part 7. This is going to be halfway through the book by the end of this, and this is going to be an interesting evening. For those who haven't seen the previous video yet, stop watching now and to watch it, because the last time we saw the Underdogs, they were pinned down, completely trapped against the inner wall of the outer city, and thanks to Ewan tricking Roth into firing a laser cannon through the walls, they've managed to escape into the prison at the centre of New London. And this is going to be a bit of an intense chapter, although it has to be said, I was talking to Julie just now, and one of the things I said was, "Oh yeah, I remember when I thought this is intense back before Underdogs 2 had pretty much the same level of intensity, but with a lot more emotions attached to it. Underdogs 3 kind of takes us up to 11, and I think I might have to actually pay people in damages when they read book 4, because it's But anyway, when I wrote this, it was rather intense. So the discussion question tonight, I'll just load up the video on my laptop as well, so I can make sure I don't miss any comments. But I believe the question is, what makes a good action scene? I felt it was fairly appropriate given the stuff you're going to see today. Yep, it's a nice discussion question. What makes a good action scene? If you're watching this not live, then leave comments anyway. If you're watching this on YouTube, leave comments anyway. And yeah, without making you wait any longer, here's chapter 13. Sunlight, so rarely seen during combat. It came over the southern wall and blasted Ewan's eyes, but he caught glimpses of the world's largest prison as he fell. His squinting eyes were met with a sea of corrugated iron roofs, half-rotted wooden beams and pillars of ugly concrete, like a favela but less habitable. Makeshift houses lined the approximate paths. Whole families must have been hosted in the doorless, improvised shelters, so fragile that a strong enough wind could collapse them. But maybe wind didn't exist inside the citadel walls, given the unholy stench of decaying wood and stale urine. Ewan's body smacked the smoothed-out concrete of the citadel floor, and he was vaguely aware of Jack and Charlie helping him to his feet. "Could have warned me about the drop," he muttered, choking through his words on the thickness of the air. "I thought Floor's Ed would be ground level." "Ewan, go!" yelled Charlie. "We're nowhere near safe yet." There were other people around him. Other humans. Real humans. Everything about them, from their faces to the clothes on their back, looked in even worse condition than the Underdogs, having had 0 chances in 11 months to wash themselves. They were retreating under their improvised roofs, shouting to their children with panicked Cockney accents. Ewan had almost forgotten what a Cockney accent sounded like. "Stay together," shouted Jack. "If we split up, we'll never find each other again." The Underdogs surged into the dense inner-city jungle. Ewan led the charge down a path between 2 shacks, leaping over clusters of concrete and metal along the ground, and cutting his hand on a roll of barbed wire spread across somebody's wall. He glanced back at the hole his team had scrambled through. It looked to be about 5 metres off the ground. A band of clones had gathered behind it and raised their automatic weapons. "Oi!" came a shout from an excitable woman to his left. "Where the hell did you get those guns?" She fell silent on either the first or second gunshot. Ewan could not tell which, but the bullets had been aimed at him. The last of the remaining onlookers screamed and scattered like small fish from a predator. Ewan joined his team behind the strongest-looking construction and dived to the ground as clones rattled bullets towards them. The wooden front of the shelter was ripped to shreds, and the screams inside quickly stopped. "This is horrible!" screamed Kate. "We've got to fire back," snarled Charlie. "At least give it a try." "Charlie, don't you—" He was too late. Charlie had thrown his head and pistol around the side of the house's remains. But Charlie did not fire, and nobody fired back. When Ewan checked why, he saw Oliver Roth and a band of clones gathered at the hole. They were tipping the laser cannon into a downward angle, pointing its gigantic barrel towards the shelter. "Laser cannon!" he screamed. All 4 Underdogs left the blast radius moments before a circular wall of light roared towards the inner city and shattered the remains of the shelter. Dust and wooden splinters filled the air, along with the screams of 1,000 civilians who had no idea why they were being fired upon. "Can we run out of range in half a minute?" asked Charlie. Because remember from the last chapter, that's how long the laser cannon takes to recharge. The other end of New London won't be out of range," shouted Ewan. "We have to get out of sight." Ewan accelerated again, questioning how much energy remained in his tiring body. The conflicted sensations of the inner city made him sick. The prison was expansive beyond imagination, but every square metre was cramped. It gave him claustrophobia and agoraphobia at the same time. He checked over his shoulder. The hole in the outer city wall was out of sight, hidden behind the walls and ceilings of the makeshift houses. Roth wouldn't hesitate to fire blindly on the prisoners, thought Ewan, just on the off chance of getting us. But they're all safe. Roth wouldn't have the patience to wait half a minute for each shot. "Guys, inside!" he heard Kate squealing from the front, with her arms stretched towards the nearest collection of wood and iron. Ewan refused to think of it as a building. One of the walls had been a fence in his former life. Grant must have harvested materials from dead towns to drop to his subjects, then just left them to it. Ewan stood guard until Jack and Charlie made it inside, and only then did he notice the home's owner. He was storming in their direction with some kind of pointed object in his grip. "Get away from here!" he screamed, thrusting his arm towards the nearest invader. The fork in his hand missed Charlie's face by half an inch. Saggy-skinned with baggy clothes, as if he had once been a beast, this man had no better weapon to defend himself. Ewan barged forward, readying himself for combat against a man he had entered this war to save. Somewhere outside, the air was humming. The laser cannon must have been close to firing. "I've watched you break in. I've heard people die," the man screamed. "Whatever you're doing here, you brought war with you." Ewan raised his assault rifle. It was enough to silence him. "Guys," said Jack from a hole in the wall, "the laser cannon's gone." Ewan did not check for himself. His eyes stayed on the man with the fork. "Seriously? They've given up already?" "It's just clones now, shooting people as they climb for the hole." "Hi, Debbie." Ewan closed his eyes in disgust, but sprung them open again in case the man tried to attack. Those despairing prisoners must have known the futility of trying to escape. They were willing to face death for a 1 in a million chance of success. Normal Londoners, who once had homes and careers and livelihoods, were ending their time on Earth by firing squad. "The clones won't have given up on us," Ewan muttered. "They'll have chosen something else to hunt us with." Once he stopped talking, Ewan noticed the hum still in the air. It had not been the laser cannon after all. Seconds later, the hum had changed to a whir. When the whir changed to a chop, chop, chop audible through the roof, Ewan swore again. "Podcopters," whispered Kate. Back when Ewan had wanted to follow his father into the army, he had seen countless videos of M134 miniguns spraying bullets. The sound could not be mistaken as the podcopter opened fire through the roof. The walls and ceiling exploded into shards. Ewan could only slam his hands over his ears, dive for a corner and trust his friends to do the same. The podcopter randomised its fire like a toddler scribbling over paper. Ewan pressed his face to the concrete ground, the only stable part of a world that shook as if mid-earthquake. When the gunfire paused, Ewan gazed back to the middle of the room. The dead body of the homeowner lay in a growing puddle of his own blood, large chunks of his flesh separated from the rest of his corpse. "We're dead if we stay here," shouted Kate, above the sound of a wooden beam collapsing from the roof. Charlie shouted something in return, but nobody heard his words. Ewan peeked upwards and saw the podcopter, egg-shaped, dark green, big enough for a pilot and controls but nothing else, and twice as close as he had predicted. He couldn't see through the tinted window glass, fitted in the shape of frowning, intimidating eyes, but the pilot inside was redirecting the miniguns towards Ewan's face. Ewan sprung to one side, and the podcopter let loose a second round of bullets that sent the rear wall tumbling onto him. Ewan's last sight before darkness was Charlie springing to his feet and charging through the exit away from the team. Ewan couldn't tell whether it was selfishness or heroism. It was probably the latter. Charlie must have known the gunfire would follow him. "Kate! Jack!" "I'm okay," Kate's voice shouted, dulled by the debris. "Where are the others?" Charlie legged it. "The copter's firing at him." "I don't know about Jack." "Digging you out," Jack grunted. "You're welcome." Once Jack had lightened the pile of wood and concrete, Ewan forced his way out like a dusty zombie from its grave. Jack turned in the direction of Kate's voice, revealing blood all over the back of his head. It must have been the debris. The podcopter was only 2 or 3 metres above, retraining its guns towards Charlie's new shelter. It was too high to jump up and grab, its hull too strong for petty rifle bullets. There was another way, but it would be a massive risk. Then again, Ewan's last massive risk had saved 4 lives in that corridor. "I can do this," he muttered to himself with his face to the sky. Charlie is 3 days from his 16th, he thought. He should live to see it. By the time the podcopter released its first wave of bullets into Charlie's shelter, Ewan had hauled himself onto the low roof of a neighbouring house. He scrambled to his feet, took a careful glance at the corrugated metal beneath him, and began his run. The pilot was facing the other way. I could not see Ewan as he charged along the rooftop and leapt from the edge. He thumped into the cold, hard back of the podcopter, his head just half a metre below the spinning blades. His left foot was balanced precariously on a joint between the titanium shell and one of its miniguns. 3,000 bullets per minute, blades spinning rapidly enough to press his helmet deep into his scalp. The most agile and manoeuvrable helicopter ever devised. Everything about the machine screamed fast, and Ewan was faced with a massive sensory overload. He clung on for dear life as the podcopter swung from the unexpected weight, its minigun still blazing but its aim less accurate. Ewan gritted his teeth, lifted his left foot and stamped it down, dislodging what appeared to be a safety guard on the casing of the left-hand minigun, a guard which prevented the bullet being aimed too high. He then pushed with all his body weight against the back end, and the muzzle of the weapon flew upwards. 50 bullets per second screamed into the sky and shattered the rotating blades above them. The air was filled with shrapnel. One of the giant shards zipped downwards and slashed its way down Ewan's left arm. With his brain paralysed by noise, vertigo and searing pain, Ewan's hands released their grip and he tumbled to the ground. The podcopter fell like a boulder, landing on the concrete with a piercing clang. Ewan, too dizzy to stand, bent his weary head towards his shrapnel wound. The metal had glided through his skin with zero difficulty. Lorraine would have a hell of a lot of stitches to perform, if he ever made it home. The door on the podcopter fell open against the concrete to reveal an angered, shaking hand. Ewan had landed in front of Charlie's shelter, and a thump against the collapsed roof revealed that his friend was still alive. The pilot stumbled out of the capsized cockpit, fumbling a pistol into his hands. "Hello, Amy." Disoriented, confused, and consumed by his own fury, he was unprepared for the girl approaching from behind. Kate, unarmed since entering the inner city, marched over the rubble with a dead man's fork clutched in her hand. When the clone turned in surprise, she planted it firmly into his neck. Her other hand grabbed the pistol from the clone's loosening fingers, tugged it free, and shot him dead. Charlie emerged from the ruins of his shelter, coughing the debris dust from his lungs. "You okay, mate?" he asked, pointing to Ewan's blood-soaked arm. "Me? What about you after your suicide charge?" "Kate?" Charlie asked, distracted again. Ewan turned around. The colour was gone from her face, and the pistol in her hands dropped to the ground. "We don't get to choose when anxiety strikes or why, but stabbing a clone in the neck with a fork is a pretty good reason." Behind her, Jack leaned against the podcopter and applied all his strength to one of its miniguns. "Guys," he said, "help me break this off. The other's destroyed, but we can still take this one." Charlie ran for the destroyed podcopter. Kate didn't move. Ewan ran to her and returned the clone's pistol to her hand, keeping a close eye on the locals. At that moment, he barely trusted the prisoners more than the clones. Overhead, something else started to hum. "Oh, bloody hell," he snarled. "Guys, we need to hide. Now." Ewan gazed at the slash on his arm that was painting his hand red. There would be no chance of repeating his trick with another podcopter. "You lot!" came a distant shout. "Here!" Ewan turned towards the voice. It came from a short, thin man in an aging shirt and the remains of a pair of jeans, outside a shack that lay within sprinting distance. One of his hands pointed towards his own entrance. There was nothing to lose. Ewan called his friends and ran for safety. He ran to escape more than the gunfire. He ran to escape the mental images of his last 5 minutes, images that would never, ever fade once they had solidified in his head. The woman next to the wall who had asked about their guns, the screams that had fallen silent in that first house, the prisoners who had tried climbing the ladder, the man with the fork. If we'd died in that corridor, all those people would still be alive. Well, for a while at least. "We'd better end up winning this war," Ewan thought. "It's the only way to make this worth it." "Thank you," Ewan gasped on arrival, as the gentleman ushered him inside with a hurried pat on the back. "Your friends had better hurry." As Charlie, Kate and Jack passed through the front door, a detached minigun shared between their arms, Ewan tried to phrase the question in his head. Thankfully, the man already knew what he was thinking. "Because Grant's people are after you," he answered. "I really can't think of a better reason to trust someone." And that's the end of chapter 13. Need a drink for that. So before moving on, I think I'm going to answer my own discussion question for the night. What makes for a good action scene? In my opinion, whether it's in a movie or whether it's in a book, I think the most important thing is the reader's or the viewer's connection to the characters. I mean, you could have the most intense action scene with characters who you really just don't care about, and yeah, the pyrotechnics may look great or the words may sound really good, but if it's characters that you know and love who are going through all this, you're bound to enjoy it. Well, I say enjoy it. You're bound to feel it a lot more anyway. Well, if anyone else has any comments, whether you're watching this live or later or on YouTube or whatever, feel free to comment. Unless anyone has any questions or comments right now, I'm going to start Chapter 14. Chapter 14, by the way, does not happen inside New London. We're going back to Spitfire's Rise now. Chapter 14. Raj could read chessboards far better than books, but he was still losing. The moves just weren't coming to him. Oh, Julie has just posted a Spencer expected twist currency love. Yep, I basically agree. So, the moves just weren't coming to him. Normally, his brain could see straight through to the root of any problem. Amongst all the famous disadvantages of dyslexia, he had been blessed with the ability to see past all the frilly, unnecessary bits of a dilemma and see problems for what they really were. Not all dyslexic people were chess wizards, but problem-solving, pattern spotting, and thinking in shapes came naturally to Raj. Except he was up against Mark. The icy 18-year-old giant in front of him had a few advantages of his own. A 3-year age bonus, an aggressive approach to basically everything, and a cool, calculating brain. No learning difficulties, Raj thought. No diagnosable conditions. How exactly did he get into Oakenfold? Oh. Debbie says, love connecting with a book. And yeah, I think the word connecting is a good word for it. You're not just reading the words on a page, you're actually engaging with it mentally and emotionally. Raj stared at the board with her hand rested on his jaw, nursing the lump that Shannon had given him this morning. Wow, she could throw a punch. Oh yeah, last time we saw Raj, Shannon had just knocked him out for investigating by going through the clothes she had arrived in and seeing if she'd left any clues. But, yep, turns out Raj is fine, he's just got a rather sore jaw and quite deservedly so. And wow, Lorraine could yell. Raj thought nurses were supposed to be gentle and caring, but Lorraine had hardly been sympathetic when he had woken up. Her voice had given him a bigger headache than Shannon's fist. The moral of the story was probably not to look through a girl's clothes, even for valid investigation reasons. Raj returned his attention to the game. He had run out of attacking options, and Mark's extra pawn was in danger of reaching the end of the board. Would you like a draw? Asked Raj. Would you like to shut your pie hole? Thomas gave a high-pitched laugh from the sofa. Clearly the boy thought Mark was joking. Mark made his closed fists visible at the edge of the table, and Raj knew what that meant. It wasn't to threaten him with physical violence. Mark wouldn't see it as worth his time or energy, but simply to remind him where the power lay. Raj placed his bishop on the long diagonal to guard the queening square. Cheers, said Mark, sending his rook straight to the end of the board and taking out Raj's last remaining knight. Ah, I forgot about that, Raj thought. He made me nervous and it completely slipped my mind. Raj couldn't help but respect that about Mark. He knew the value of winning battles by removing the opponent's confidence. And Mark says, not familiar with this book. I think so. You're going to have to remind me what the RWC... Oh, is that Rugby World Cup? I'm basically just guessing here. What was I? Before Raj could assess his options, loud footsteps came from the cellar stairs. He stared towards the door with an eyebrow perked. It couldn't have been Gracie, who was upstairs sleeping off a bout of laziness, or Lorraine from the farm, who was too slow for the speed of the footsteps. It might have been Shannon, but only if Lorraine had let her out of her sight. When silent Simon burst through the living room door, Raj knew it was time to forget about the chess game. Simon stood at the side of the board with a sheet of paper quivering in his hands, mouthing a word that was probably Lorraine. Oh, got it right. Give me that, said Mark coldly, reaching for the paper. Simon mouthed Lorraine again, but surrendered the paper as commanded. Remember that Simon was at the comms unit with McCormick, so he's run all the way back to Spitfire's Rise for what must be an important reason. When Mark read the note, he frowned, even more than his default expression. Thomas, he said, get out. The child didn't try to negotiate like he did with everyone else. He knew Mark better than that. Raj watched him leave the room, passing Shannon on the way out. She must have followed the loud footsteps to see if anything was wrong. When Thomas was gone, Mark read the note aloud. Dear Lorraine, I'm sorry to report this bad news of paper, but you deserve to know quickly. Contact has been lost with all 5 of our friends. They had to go into New London to find Tyler's belongings, and Ewan found a USB stick in his backpack. But Kate's last call told me that Alex is most likely dead, and the other 4 are trapped in the corridors with almost zero chance of escape. Oh, bloody hell. God, please not them. Not the best fighters we have. And not Kate. The war's pretty much over if they're dead. I'd like you to break the news very gently to the others, Mark finished. And don't tell Shannon. She needs to feel safe. Mark threw the paper back to Simon and turned to the young woman at the door. So, yeah, sorry about that. Shannon turned and ran, her face streaming with tears. Raj did not have the motivation to follow until he heard the child's voice shouting, Shannon, wait! And rapid footsteps following her into the cellar. Suppose I'd better watch over him, for all the good it will do. Raj left the chessboard, and Mark took the time to push his opponent's king over before following. By the time Raj was halfway down the steps, Thomas had placed himself firmly between Shannon and the exit to Spitfire's rise, his arms and legs spread across the improvised door. Shannon reacted like a caged animal, with a supermarket of weapons within arm's reach. She ignored the unloaded guns and seized the nearest hunting knife. Unbelievably, Thomas didn't move. The blade, pointed in his direction, quivered in Shannon's hand as if it had already been thrown. She's killed a human before, Thomas, Raj thought. Raj's breath held itself in his throat. He and Mark were only part way down the cellar steps. Easy for Shannon to spot if she turned around, even in the cellar's natural darkness. But Raj wasn't worried about whether Shannon would come for them. He had spent enough time around single-minded people to know how committed they could be when they only had singular objectives. And only one thing stood in the way of Shannon's. Please, came the boy's voice, bleating like a sheep. Please just listen. If Thomas gets stabbed, Lorraine won't be able to save him. I can't just stand here. He's not ready for heaven yet. Don't even think about it, Mark whispered from the step behind him, as much as he was capable of whispering. If she gets pinned on 2 sides, she'll panic and stab her way out. Raj closed his eyes. He was not ready to accept his own helplessness any more than he could accept the deaths of Kate and the others. But Mark was right and he knew it. Everything Raj knew about combat strategy, hand-to-hand fighting and people in general, told him there was nothing he could do. The last free child in Great Britain stood at knife point, threatened by an adolescent girl who could kill him in the belief that she was defending herself. I don't know what's worrying you, Thomas said, but everyone cares for you here. Outside there's nothing. Here you have everything you could want. Shannon's unarmed hand swiped out and anchored itself onto the side of Thomas's head. Before the child could react, he had been thrown aside, and he yelped as his spine rammed against the memorial wall. Raj winced as Thomas' eyes squeezed closed, and his mouth locked open in pain. The boy spent a helpless moment regathering his senses before a metal blade rested against his throat. Give up, Thomas. Let her go. And for once in your life, shut up. Can I please say one thing before you leave? Thomas asked, the larynx of his throat rising and falling over the blade. Raj gritted his teeth. Shannon secured a grip on the knife. Up to that moment, she had begun to relax her fingers and concentrate on the exit. She made eye contact with Thomas. Penetrative, frightening eye contact. And waited. Just give us a little more time, said Thomas. If you stay and don't like it, you can always leave later. But if you leave now, you'll never know what you missed out on. Shannon froze in place, her hand fixed around the door handle. The knife remained next to Thomas's throat, but at least it wasn't moving. Shannon, the boy asked, what are you afraid of? There was a flash of anger in her eyes, and she moved her face to within an inch of Thomas's nose. Then she spoke. I'll tell you what I'm afraid of, sunshine, she snarled. Nicholas bloody Grant. 1 million clone soldiers, grown in factories by Nathaniel Pierce, trained for battle by Ian Marshall, and a 14-year-old psychopath creeping through the walls and slaughtering your friends. Raj could feel Mark's angered breath on the back of his neck. The hatred in Mark's heart seemed to beat in time with Shannon's, but hers was even more powerful. And then last night, being marched by Keith to the last place on earth I'd volunteered to go. Killing his clones before they could fire a shot, killing him in that garden. Even the countryside isn't safe. Shannon's words ended, although Raj couldn't tell whether she had finished her sentence or just ran out of words. "And you want to leave anyway?" asked Thomas. Shannon paused. Her grip on the door lost its tightness. "Look at this," finished Thomas, tapping the stone slab behind him. "That's our memorial wall. Most of our friends died outside." Nice work, thought Raj, saying the word most as quietly as possible. She doesn't need to know about Roy's cancer or Mike's suicide, or 13-year-old Callum running out of insulin a week after we got here. Shannon paused again. Raj was unsure how long the pause was, but if his heartbeats were anything to go by, it must have been half a minute. Then she took a deep step backwards and stabbed the hunting knife into the door. She threw a fist against one of the shelves, toppling it over and spilling handguns across the floor. She marched across the cellar, her evacuation plan cancelled, and burst through the tunnel towards the farm. When she had vanished from sight, Thomas looked straight towards Raj and gave him a toothy grin. Bright eyes, nice words, best intentions. Succeeding anyway. Thomas Foster might have been the most incredible child Raj had ever met. "That settles it," said Mark. "We're going." "Huh?" asked Raj, as Mark pushed past him into the armoury and reached for the shotgun. "Going where?" "Lambourne's Health Centre. Right now. Simon, unlock the ammo cupboard, bring a load of bullets and wake up Gracie. Then give your little note to Lorraine and meet us back here." Raj had not even noticed Simon standing behind him. On Mark's command, he turned and ran. "Mark, I don't think—" "Thomas," Mark continued as if Raj hadn't spoken, "run to comms. Tell McCormick we're raiding Lieutenant Lambourne's headquarters, the place Tyler was taking Shannon." Thomas's smile dropped, and he looked to the floor, puzzled. Raj recognised the boy's expression. It came from the panic that all children felt when a teacher told them to do one thing, but the school bully told them to do another. "But I'm not allowed to go outside." "You can in emergencies. And this is one. You're a big lad now, and McCormick needs to know we're heading out. Besides, he's got big news to tell you about the strike team. Go." The boy vanished through the makeshift door and began a journey he had never made before. He knew the route to the Boys' Brigade Hall in case of emergencies, but had never followed the directions himself, and certainly not alone. "McCormick's going to have Mark's head," Raj thought. "You all right, Raj?" Mark asked, with a voice that dared him to complain. "Why the health centre?" "Because you just heard Shannon calling it the last place on earth she'd volunteer to go. I want to know what's there." Simon returned down the stairs with a big sack of ammunition, with Gracie 3 steps behind. "What's going on?" she asked with a yawn, approximately dressed. Raj found it weird, seeing her tired enough to not yet be in chameleon mode. She hadn't been awake long enough to put the mask of her additional personalities on. In the corner of Raj's eye, he saw Simon making his way through the door to the farm, note in hand. "I'll explain on the way," said Mark, "but we're raiding that health centre. Now." This is wrong, thought Raj as he reached for his weapons. Not without McCormick's blessing. Not without Ewan. I guess Mark's the closest person we have left to a leader now. Wait, is Mark already staking a claim to leadership now Ewan's out of his way? Raj shuddered. He didn't know for sure that his friends were dead, but he had already begun to accept it. After years of having faith in the unseen, his instincts drifted towards bitter life experience, that all too often people simply walked out that door and never came home. To his left, Gracie vanished into the generator room with a set of combat clothes to change into. "But why now?" asked Raj. "Why not wait and do it properly later?" "The war's lost, Raj," Mark said, stuffing his pockets with shotgun shells. Raj could not find an answer. Mark continued. "You didn't think it would happen someday? This war was only ever about waiting, but I'm going to slit Lambourne's throat before it ends. Whoever he is, whatever he's done, he caused this. Him and Tyler. If it weren't for them, Shannon wouldn't have sweet-talked the guys into heading to their deaths." Raj bent to the floor and picked up 2 of the handguns, then rummaged through the ammo sack for the right kind of bullets. "What about Shannon?" he whispered. "Why do you care? She knocked you out for perving through her clothes." "Is she safe?" "What, from me? If she needs a bullet, I'll do it when we get back. For now, she might still be a good guy." Gracie reappeared, dressed for combat and adjusting her helmet to keep her hair neat. Even chameleons cared about their appearance. You've got lots of weapons, Mark, she said, her voice still in just-got-out-of-bed mode. "I'm carrying Simon's too. I get the feeling he won't have much prep time." Sure enough, when Simon walked back into the cellar, he was followed by Lorraine. She was about as unhinged as Raj had expected, having just read the note for herself. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she barked. "Going to the health centre," answered Mark. "Thomas has gone to tell McCormick." You sent Thomas to comms by himself? Simon, come. Mark, you will bloody well answer me. Be grateful, Mark said. It was either that or leave him alone with you and Shannon. She threatened him with a knife, you know, while you left her unsupervised. Lorraine Shepherd, the matriarch of Spitfire's Rise, had no words. He knows she's feeling weak, so he's kicking her while she's down. The more helpless she feels, the less she can object to his leaving. 11 months earlier, Mark had used his brutal but natural authority to command the Oakenfold students to abandon their most vulnerable schoolmates. He is performing the same trick again, making a decision on everyone's behalf and making them feel like they weren't allowed to disagree. Mark opened the door. Gracie went through without question, and Raj followed with as much reluctance in his face as he could manage. The tunnel to the outside was darker and damper than he remembered. It had been a long while since he had left for Spitfire's Rise. Simon, now. This isn't right, Raj thought. We should stand in front of the memorial wall before we go. We have to say united by our differences and everything else. Simon ran into the tunnel, and Mark closed the exit before Lorraine could regain her composure and protest. It's not right to abandon Lorraine with Shannon, or send Thomas to comms by himself. It's not right that Kate and the others are probably dead. None of this is right. And that's it. We are now halfway through the novel. So, yep, thanks very much for watching. And, yeah, I make no apologies for leaving you on two cliffhangers at the same time. That's basically it. If you've got anything else in the comments in terms of what makes a good action scene, then feel free to leave them. Whether answer them now or answer them later this evening, I will answer them. And besides that, I'll see you tomorrow. And, oh yeah, one thing I forgot to do yesterday was tell you about, first off, Underdogs' main Facebook page. I'm going to post a link to everything I'm referring to right now. Underdogs has its own Facebook page if you want to find that and follow it. If you're watching this on YouTube, the address is facebook.com/underdogsnovel, one word. And if you want to get the rest of the novel before listening to the rest of these, here are some links to Amazon and basically everywhere else, and also where you can pre-order the sequel, and there is an option on there to get a copy of the original as well as the sequel. So that is basically it. No problem, Debbie. Thank you for listening all the way through, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.